to the left of this, to my left, down that hall. Refreshments will be served at the end of this program. And also, the last thing is that after all the presentations are concluded, that is when we will take questions. Okay? So on behalf of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation and the Armenian Democratic Liberal Party, I'd like to welcome you to today's discussion about the new constitution of the Republic of Armenia and its ramifications. This is the latest in a series of joint ventures between the ARF and ADL. We hope that there are many more. Both organizations share a common belief that shedding light on issues of importance facing Armenia, as well as communities large and small in the diaspora, is critical. With that, I would like to invite our moderator for the day, founding director and host of Armenian Radio Hour, Mr. Vartan Abdul.
Բարի եկեք, քոնե երկու փար հայերենով արդայիկ այսօր, ինձ միշտ ծժվարությամբ կմատվիմ իմ հասկնան, թե ինչու ամպեր ենք խոսենք, բայց եթե նիսկ մեկ անց մգա, որ հայերենը չի հասկնան, ընդհանրապես կփոխենք մեր լեզուն անգլերենի եւ այդպես վիդելա այս երեկոն։ Երեք դիտաններ ունենք, որ քիչ հետ պիտի լսենք, իմ բարդականությունս այն է, ցեզի բարեկալուստ մաղթել, Ramgavar դերու եւ տաշտակ ցագաներու գոմե, Եվ ասել թե այս երեկոյան այսօրվա տասախոսությունը, ասուլիսը, panel discussion-ը պիտի լա շինիչ, պիտի լա օգտակար, բեզի պիտի դա դերեցություններ, որ ավելի մոդեն հասկանանք, թե ինչ է որ պետք է մավոր է հայ ժողովուրդը հայրենիքի մեջ։ Պիտի ներկայացնեմ երեք անձերը եւ անձը ներկայացնեմ, այդպես Անձնախումբը որոշեց դերը պիտի կրավի։ Եվ առաջին անգասկաց դոկտոր Վարուժան Ոսկանյանը, որ մեզի Ռոմանիային գայցել է, ինքը կրող է։ I'm sorry, I have to go to English, I apologize. Ինչ օրերու եկած են պետք է ներողություն խնդրենք։ My responsibility is to introduce the panelists, and I'll be doing it in English. And as I introduce them, they will be asked to take their seats. And the first one is a giant from Romania. His name is Dr. Varujan Voskanyan. He's an author, poet, a great politician in the Romanian parliament, representing the united Armenian-Romanian community there. He is here to promote his book, The Book of Whispers, which has international recognition and a great success. It's a story about not only the genocide, but the question of seeking revenge or forgiving or forgetting, not forgetting but forgiving maybe, but I'm sure he will have a lot to tell us. The other day he was at St. Leonard Armenian Church at a lecture, and one thing I remember when he said, what is more important, this, what is more powerful, this or this, indicating unity is strength. And I think that is something very easy to remember, symbolic, disunited and united, and we have to fight for that. Also, he is a great believer and promoter of unity within the Armenian community, especially in the greatest Armenian community in the diaspora, the United States of America. No other community has the challenges that we have in this new world. We all know the situation in the Middle East, where Armenians are moving towards the West, and America today is the most powerful country in the diaspora. The other person who is coming from beautiful Montreal is Hagop Der Khachadurian. He is a member of the bureau of the Tashtak Chichun. This is a very respectable position within the Tashtak Tsagan party. You cannot go higher than being a member of the bureau. Obviously, it comes with lots of hard work throughout the life of a person. Hagop Der Khachadurian has been involved from school days, as a student university. He has been with the ASA, with the Hominid Men, with the Scouts, with the ANCA, with every possible thing. And also, he has been a believer of Armenian education. As such, he has also been a principal of the Armenian Saturday School at the beautiful Surp Hagop in Montreal. And any one of us who has been in Montreal knows about the work that is taking place within Sulpagop, where the future generation of Armenians is incubated. Hagop and also Varujan Oskanyan, as well as Sevag Hagopian, have been awarded. This is the tradition with the Armenian community and leadership. Hagop has been awarded by a medal and recognition by the Catholicos Aram I, and a medal of, he's a Prince of Cilicia. Also, he is a recipient of the medal of Bechitar Goch, which is given to him by the President of Armenia. Very, very prestigious. Hagop is in the IT business. He's a computer scientist. And what can I tell you about him? But that he's a very active member. And the other day I was talking to a friend in Montreal. When they heard that Hagop is coming to the New Jersey area, they please asked me to record all the program because he's a very respectable member in the Agup area. As such, we're just conveying the well-wishing of the Montreal Armenian community to you. The third person, a young, energetic individual, a very responsible editor-in-chief of the Zartong. The Zartong was established in 1937. It is the organ of the Ramgavar party. These are no secret informations I'm disseminating. And Zartong is still in existence and live and kicking. It is in the hands of Sevag Hagopian since 2015, and Sevag also. Born in Beirut, grew up within the Tekian, Ovagimian, Manugian school, the scouts, the clubs, the social activities. But he's got this passion for Armenian education. He went to, even for his higher education, University of London, AUB, all the higher educations. He has degrees in sociology and economics, business administration, Bachelor of Arts, and Master of Arts. Sevag is passionate about Armenia, everything that deals with Armenia. And I have been reading and following his not only words, but actions. And one of the most powerful things he says, even if there's only one person who reads Armenian, Zartong is to be kept alive. And we appreciate that. And we really, really appreciate our panelists for traveling for such distances and being with us. The last thing I would like to commend is the organizing committee, the ADL and the ARF. This is the second such discussion that brings us together. And I think, I really, really honestly believe, who was it who said, Hovannes Shiraz, he said, Ansan v'shti tareren hayotz, yegan gamki tareren hayotz. You know, many things have changed in the community we live in. Many, many. I speak with many, many of the people in the community. And the overall trend is, yes, there were problems, there were divisions, maybe we did not know how to resolve these. But we are now faced with a very, very educated clientele, a very educated group of Armenians who are willing to move forward without being anchored by past sad pages of the Armenian history. And we owe it to them to move forward. And for that, I thank you for being here, because I am very proud to be here. So I would like to invite Dr. Varujan Oskanyan. Varujan Oskanyan. Once again, we are in for a very educational, very informative afternoon. The topic, obviously, is the constitutional reforms in Armenia and the pitfalls and the possibilities. And these are very, very interesting times for Armenia. We know that we have moved from a presidential system to a parliamentary system. We know that a few days ago, we have elected the fourth president of Armenia, Armen Sarkisyan. That was beautifully publicized. And very soon, within the parliament, we'll be electing a prime minister. And it won't be surprised if present president, parliamentarian Serge Sarkisyan will be the prime minister. We are going to honor Varujan Oskanyan's tight schedule. He has to be at the airport at a set time. So we are going to ask him to open this panel discussion addressing the questions of the pitfalls and possibilities of a new system of government, the parliamentary system in Armenia. Thank
you very Thank you very much. Նախ առաջ կուզեմ հայտնել իմ իրավաբանությունս եւ շնորհավորակներս մեր գլխավոր կուսակցությունները, որ կազմակերպեցին աչքի դաժողով, I want to express my gratitude for both our Armenian parties for organizing this meeting. I think that maybe this workshop should be organized 3-4 years ago because maybe you could prevent some provisions in the Constitution. I have to stress on 3 different dimensions. First of all, the background of the Constitution. The Constitution itself, I mean the content of the Constitution, and the perspectives of the Constitution. I don't want to stress too much on the background of the Constitution. Me as member of the Armenian diaspora, I think we have to respect the decisions of Armenians from Hellenic, from Armenia. They decided to accept this constitution, and it's a fact. At the same time, of course, there are rumors about the measure. The population was informed about the content of the constitution. If in Armenia, in the public opinion of our country, was a really debate about that, if the aim declared before was to change the constitution or to make some amendments to the constitution, I have to say that it's a new constitution. Despite the fact that there are some articles identical, practically it's a new constitution of Armenia. It's a turning point in the vision about the balance of the powers in the state. So I don't want to stress on the background. But it's important to know how the background is for not repeating in the future what's happened. Because everything has to be free and fair. Fair means to respect the rules of game. But free means everybody has to have the awareness and the awakeness of his vote. Why I'm saying I don't want to stress on the background, because my personal opinion, I don't know if my colleagues share our opinion, is this constitution is only transitory, is provisional, because there are here, there are a mixture between the reminiscence of the communist mentalities and some open approaches for democracy. It's a mixture which can't resist to the examine of time. What about the perspectives? You're very right to put together pitfalls and opportunities. Because in this constitution, they are. Because it's a mixture of pitfalls and opportunities. Maybe the biggest opportunities are a best description comparing with the former constitution of the human rights. The human rights are explicitly put on the list. In the same time, the parliament becomes the hardcore of the system. But, now it's a but with big B. The problem is that this constitution opens a window to abuses. I mean, this constitution is not very clear concerning the way the human fundamental rights could be implemented in the country. I don't want to speak too much, only maybe a few 10 minutes, but I want to stress the point out on some aspects which could in the future become dangerous for the path of Armenia to democracy. The first point, and maybe the most important one, is about the human rights. It's a chapter dedicated to it. I have to say that it's a very long constitution. It's like a story. It's a masterpiece of a storyteller, it's a constitution. It's too long, too much descriptions. There are useless provisions. For example, Article 29 says, any discrimination based on sex is prohibited. So Article 30 says, men and women has equal rights. It's practically the same. There is, for example, description of the Audiovisual, Television, Radio Commission. In the Constitution, you don't put such a chapter because such a commission could be ruled by law, not by Constitution. But it means that they had a very specific interest to put under control the Radio and TV Commission. And I will try to carry out a little bit to clarify this topic. So, human rights. The third article says very well, the human being shall be the supreme value in the Republic of Armenia. Very well. The inalienable dignity of the human being shall be the integral basis of the rights and freedoms. But every right described in the Constitution has a provision saying the following. That specific right may be restricted only by law with the aim of protecting state security, the economic well-being of the country, preventing or solving crimes, protecting the public order, health, and morals. My dear friends, because I'm coming from Europe, I will mention what Alexis de Tocqueville said around 108 years ago. He said, the law punishes the crime, not the sin. Not the sin. Adultery is a sin. It's not a crime. Homosexuality could be, I don't know, a sin, but not a crime. Hypocrisy, felony, it's a sin, not a crime. If you put in the law that you can restrict human rights based on moral ideas, it's very, very dangerous. The same with the public. What does it mean, public order? If I'm a dictator, the public order for me is completely different than the public order defined by the civil society. In any democratic constitution, there are not such restrictions for the human rights. It means that it's possible for a majority in the parliament to restrain the human rights based on those provisions, which are many in the Constitution. For example, the right to a strike. The right to a strike may be restricted by law or protecting public interest or the fundamental rights and freedom of others. Every strike restricts the freedom of others because streets become crowded, maybe the aeroplane don't fly, and I can't stop any strike because the Constitution says that if a strike affects the rights of others, I can stop them. The right of property could be struck if the fundamental rights and freedom of others is in danger. But my property is against the freedom of others. Because if I'm the owner, I'm the only owner. You can't be the owner of my property. So there are very, very ambiguous definitions which could create abuses and could give to the foreign investors and to the foreigners who intend to come to Armenia a big interrogation sign. Now about the parliament. You know, one of the main problems in our country, I don't want to give advice. In Romania, you have the same problems. If you ask me to speak about Romania, I will be very critical, but now we discuss about Armenia. I don't want to give it. I'm not more clever than Armenians. But Armenia has a problem. In Armenia, we didn't define very well the distinction between politics, judicial, and economy. There are ministers very rich, and they can't become rich only with the wage from the state. The relationship between politics and economy is too close. for a democracy. This is the reason why we have to be very careful with this constitution to see if the constitution really separates the economy and the politics. And what we see on the Article 96, criminal prosecution of a parliamentarian may be initiated only with the consent of the National Assembly. My dear Armenian and American friends, all the constitutions in the world, they give to the parliament MPs some protection. Protection against statement, political statements, and protection against arrest and violability of domicile, of home, because they could have in the house some documents also. Only for it. But if an MP make a crime, he's an ordinary citizen like all the other citizens in the country. So the definition of immunity is so large and very dangerous for reaching the aim to separate economy and politics. There are a lot of ambiguous provisions. They try to create a new Tsar, the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is a new Tsar of Armenia because he has a lot of rights. I evoke these things, and I'm very pleased that Mr. Sarkisian don't accept and don't have in mind to be Prime Minister, because we have two examples, Erdogan and Putin, changing provisions of constitution or trying to avoid the deadline of their mandates, playing between Prime Minister and President. The presence of Sarkisian in front of the government could be a big danger for the trust the way to democracy of Armenia could demonstrate in the eyes of worldwide. So, legislative initiative. If a draft law could significantly reduce its revenues of the state budget, the government may demand such law to be adopted by majority vote of the total number. So, any draft which has impact on budget could become organic law. But nobody explains what does it mean significantly reduction of the budget. But maybe it's the main problem of the Constitution. There are two. I want to stress only on these two. The first one, the human rights, and the second one, the Prime Minister. In any democracy in the world, the Prime Minister is nominated by secret vote. In any country in the world, the misconfidence motion is followed by a secret vote. And when the government asks for confidence, the parliament answers yes or no with secret vote. In the Armenian constitution, the Prime Minister is nominated by the parliament by open vote. The misconfidence motion is followed by open vote. You can imagine, if somebody dare to vote against, he has to think about consequences. Any secret negotiations is not permitted because everything is open. So, this provision says that, I have to say something very, very sad for me. The authors of the Constitution don't trust in Armenian people. It's a constitution made by some authors and some politicians who don't trust and fear their own people. And they try to avoid any war, any danger, any pitfall to their maintaining to power. I don't discuss about the president because president made always in the world by proposal of the Prime Minister. Everything is made by proposal to, he can only marry without the permission of the Prime Minister.
He's already married.
He's already married. Yeah, I know that. It's a joke. So, I want to close here I have only two small points. I discuss about communist mentalities. Foreign citizens can't enjoy property right on land. The monopoly are permitted by law. Subsoils resources shall be exclusive property of the state. their provision, which are not compatible or adequate to the market economy and to the opening of the economy to others. And the last one, the autonomous body, central bank, court of accounts, audit court, the commission of television and others, has to be created with councils following the proportion of the parliamentary groups in the parliament. I mean, all those bodies have to have representatives of the opposition at the same time. Nowhere in the constitution is not said that the control of those bodies is made by councils using at the same time the representatives of the opposition following the political composition of the parliament. So, I want to end my presentation saying that it's a good point ahead, but if the constitution is not implemented following the spirit of democracy, could become a danger for Armenia. And my personal opinion is that in the medium run perspective, this constitution has to be changed following my observation and maybe the observations of my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Obviously, you are very, very happy with what you heard, and very, very powerful speaker. Thank you, Dr. Barajan. One thing for sure, which I may add, is many, many a times, not only Armenians, it goes with any other situation, people do not care about what is being passed, what is legislation, till after the fact. And many, many a times we wake up after the fact when it's too late. So maybe this will just remind us that we should pay attention and ask for clarifications before a constitutional legislative gets passed. Thank you again. The next person is Agopder Khachatourian, who is from Montreal. He is a bureau member of the Tashnak Institute, and as we introduce him, we expect to hear his take on the pitfalls and the possibilities of the constitutional reform in Armenia.
Սերի հայրենագիցներ նախ ուզեմ հայտնել իմ շնորհակալությունը եւ ուրախությունը, որ ցեր մեջ կգտնվիմ եւ որպես հոգեհարազատներ այսօր դիտում ունենք մեր հիմնական բաժինը այս խոսակցության գդալու հարց պատասխանելու ճամփով հայերենով հարցումներով պատասխանենք հայերենով, անգլերենով եւ ուրիշ լեզուներով փորձենք, բայց հիմնականն այն է, որ ինչպես նշեց պարոն Անդոն, այսօր փորձենք հիմնականը դալ անգլերենով, որովհետեւ բոլորն հասկանան եւ լավապես ըմբռնեն այս շատ կարեւոր նյութը։ Գիտեք, երբ որ երեք ներկայացնող ունիք, անպայման ունեն գրկություններ գնա։ Ադու համար որտեսի խնայեն եւ չգտնենք այն ինչ որ արդեն դոկտոր Բաղուժյանը ասավ, որ իմպակտ ունեցած են զանազանալու տարիներ առաջ Ռումանիայի մեջ, ուրեմն այդ բաժինները պիտի գարշ ցեվով սա եւ բազալից երկրորդն այն ինչ որ ասավ դոկտորը, իսկ այն դերերը որ համացան չեն մնալի նշ։ So, in order to keep it short and not to be repetitive, because as you know, when you have three speakers, it is only fair to assume that since we come from different countries, Canada, Lebanon, and Romania, we have not synchronized neither the text nor the ideas that we are going to express today. Therefore, there will be repetitions. And as I said in Armenian, and this is the only repetition I'm going to do, is that whenever I do mention a point that Dr. Baujan has already mentioned, I'll agree with it and pass on to another point, and if there is a disagreement, I'll also mention and explain why. Our generation and that of our parents, most of you here, fought for the recognition of genocide, and now, after a successful worldwide campaign that brought the genocide to the forefront, we need to turn the page and look to the dossier of reparations. You might wonder, what does that have to do with the Constitution of Armenia? As you know, all of us, the political parties, Askayim Musaksuner, many Armenians who are deeply conscious of the national identity, national ideology, have always sought the establishment of an Armenia that will be the central homeland of us all, that will nourish the Armenian identity wherever Armenians are. And as such, it is extremely important to be sure that our constitution, which will be the guiding book, the guiding principles of our state, be ensconced not only in history, but in the Armenian consciousness, in the trajectory that we have gone through, especially in the last 100, 120 years, which has shaped the identity of the Armenian nation as we know it today. When I say nation, I mean worldwide. When I mention Armenia or fatherland or homeland, of course I mean Armenians in Armenia. Armenia's rebirth as an independent republic created a feeling of euphoria for all Armenians worldwide. It was only natural, especially since it started with the Qarabağ movement in 1988, as you know, and in 1991, it brought us to the re-emergence of independence after so many years of being in the wilderness or under Soviet regime. But the joy of seeing our fatherland free and independent was tempered by the establishment of an authoritarian regime of the first presidency, bent on centralizing power and rejecting any other vision except the narrow, globalist, cosmopolitan outlook, and we'll go into details if you have questions, combined with a defeatist attitude regarding the ARF question, and devoid of any national unifying ideology or aspirations. The gap between Armenia and the diaspora widened during this period. The highly centralized authoritarian presidential system resulted in Armenians understanding that lingering Soviet attitudes would only encourage the concentration of even more powers in a central figure, and hope for an open and truly open society would actually recede. So I joined Dr. Barujan in saying that the notion of a central strongman, a Tsar, was very much present at the birth of our new independence. And as such, there were major issues. I'm sure you're aware of it, and I won't go into the details. But one of the significant aspects that impacted us as diasporan Armenians was the fact that specifically, constitutionally, dual citizenship was forbidden in Armenia. So there was a special mention of the fact that that question would be taken in the constitution, but in a negative sense, without allowing any kind of bridges to be built between the two segments of our nation. It took almost 15 years, as you know, for Armenia and a new president to realize that instead of creating gaps, we should be building bridges. And as such, there was a new political process that took place, and in 2005, almost 15 years after, there was a referendum which changed the system of Armenia. Most people don't realize that this is the third change. This is not, and as Dr. Barujan said, maybe there will be a fourth or a fifth. And people in Armenia are now talking about a fourth republic, third republic, fifth republic. I want to stay away from any kind of adjectives that are empty in nature, because I would like to concentrate on the essential, not the image, but the substance. Therefore, after those 15 years, there were two major changes that that referendum brought us in 2005. One change was that it destroyed some of the foundations of the strong presidential system. So Armenia went into what was called at the time a semi-presidential, semi-parliamentary system, where the role of the prime minister was expanded, but there was an executive president who was a determining factor and actually the leader of the executive power. And one correction, major correction, which impacted us was that it actually took out the restriction for dual citizenship. So any Armenian worldwide could become an Armenian citizen, and they even, by law, instituted a procedure, a process, a simplified process for those who were considered ethnically Armenian. And there was a major debate in Armenia as to how do you define ethnic Armenian and so on. Thankfully, those existential questions were put to rest, and it is very clear now that whoever feels Armenian, whoever speaks Armenian, who has an attachment to Armenian, who has roots in Armenian, is an Armenian. All the others are ridiculous distinctions that only divide us instead of uniting us. So that question has been put to rest, which unfortunately was debated at the initial stages of this republic. We as Taşrakçı, as you know, have always worked towards the establishment of a parliamentary system. And the reason for it being that we thought that given the situation of Armenia, given its geographical location, given it being surrounded by enemies, given of the fact that we are one nation, indivisible, and that nation is not just in Armenia, where there's only about 1/3 of our population, 2/3 of the population or more are actually in the diaspora, that we should come up with certain unifying features, decentralization of power, participation by all, and we only saw that a truly implemented, a full parliamentary system is the only way to go. And as such, we were working towards the establishment of such a system from day one. From 1989, when we announced it, all the way to the establishment of the Republic in 91, and up to today, we have been probably one of the few in Armenia who has been consistently talking about establishing this parliamentary system, which is now becoming a reality. So after all, after this semi-presidential and semi-prime ministerial or parliamentary system that we had, that is the system, by the way, which is actually active today. Most people don't realize that even with the election of a new president, it is still the old system, which will only come into full implementation mode in April. So this timing is very good, because in a month, we're actually going to do the full transition into this new system and see how it develops and how it actually creates precedents. So that new constitution, which was adopted in 2015, only a couple of years ago, actually established this new system, which is coming full circle into full implementation by next month, and it established a parliamentary system where the National Assembly dominates the political agenda. That is the whole aim and the purpose of the Constitution. I'm not going to cover the general aspects that Dr. Varujan covered so well, because I don't want to repeat what he said about human rights, the dignity of the individual, the aspects, the assembly, and so on. But I would like to concentrate instead on a couple of points, and I don't know if I'm making Sebag's life more difficult, but we'll probably, unfortunately, speak of the same things from different angles. It is clear that this constitution attempts to make the National Assembly the only elected representative assembly of the people of Armenia. As such, there are no more elections, either of a prime minister directly by the population or a president by the population. The will of the people is expressed through parliament only. And as such, every MP, member of parliament, or deputy, they have sometimes translated it as deputy, which is really wrong because it comes from the French député, but usually they use the word member of parliament. In the States, it's congressman, senator, but they don't have that distinction in Armenia. It's a unicameral system, it's not a federal system. And as such, the power nominally and actually, hopefully actually also, resides in the individual members of parliament that make up the parliament. Dr. Varujan was right in pointing out that when you have an absolute majority in parliament, the government can act almost like a semi-dictatorship because of the fact that they control the majority of the parliament. And if the party that is controlling parliament is disciplined enough to be able to impose its will, then it can happen. It does happen even in the best of democracies in the world. I've seen it happen in Canada, I've seen it happen in the United Kingdom, two other parliamentary democracies that could serve as example. But Armenians were intelligent enough, and the process, I do not agree with some of the ideas promulgated that this is so fast and it was not thought of. This process has been going on for years. There was a constitutional panel and a committee that has been working on this issue for the last 7 years. We were a member of it. There were many other factions working on it. The chair of that committee was the chairman of the Constitutional Court of Armenia, Gagi Karutyunyan, somebody you might know or you have seen or heard in the past. And they did a thorough job of trying to analyze most of the constitutions that existed in the world. And they created a unique constitution which took what they considered to be the positive aspects of parliamentary systems and combined it with some others. What do I mean? In the traditional parliamentary systems, and this is probably the crux of our issue, there is a mix of executive and legislative power. In the United Kingdom, in Canada, the member of parliament can also be at the same time a minister. And as such, the checks and balances of the system does not work like in the States, does not work even like in France. It is more of an intermingled executive legislative system. It does enshrine the primacy of parliament, but it does not do a quick separation of executive and legislative powers. The Armenian constitution, based on that experience of some of the major parliamentary democracies in the world, by the way, many countries are parliamentary democracies, and they are the ones who usually foster dialogue. And most of the aggressive states and warmongering states have very strong centralized governments, so that should be indicative of what was happening. Those processes also bring to the forefront issues of balance of powers. So in order to balance that power, Armenia decided that its constitution, and this version as well, would not allow that an elected representative serve in the government. Therefore, if you do become prime minister, if you do become a minister of the government, you have to resign your seat. And as such, you have to actually detach yourself from the legislative authority, because the government, in theory, it reports to parliament. Therefore, you cannot be a judge, jury, and executioner at the same time. That is one of the major failings of the parliamentary democracies that we see in major European and Canadian systems. The other aspect, which is very important to emphasize, is that they try to achieve a certain balance between the power of the prime minister and the power of the government. So I do not necessarily agree with the fact that the prime minister, by definition, is such an important and central figure that he can dominate or she can dominate all. That is not how it is written in the Constitution. The way it is written in the Constitution is that there is a division of responsibility between the ministers, the 3 deputy ministers. Instead of having 1 deputy minister, now Armenia will have 3 deputy ministers, each one with a sector of the economy or responsibility. Today we have only 1, Vacek Gabrielian, and as of next month we'll have 3. The government size is restricted, it's only 18 ministers, you cannot have more than that. And also the ministerial responsibilities and accountabilities are enshrined. Therefore, Parliament can not only collectively hold the government responsible, it can individually hold ministers responsible. Therefore, from a perspective of letter of the Constitution, it is a very well thought, well-written document. But as was mentioned, and I agree fully, we have to be sure that not only the letter is respected, but the spirit of the Constitution is respected as well. And that is one of the reasons they have decided to participate in the coalition, because we wanted to be there when actually the rules, the laws were being implemented, to make sure that this Constitution does not remain a dead document. Let's not forget that even during Soviet times, they had one of the best constitutions in the world, but in application, you saw that it became a totally strange animal. And as such, therefore, we have to be vigilant. And that is where our role as diasporans is very important, that we should continue exercising the process so that democracy takes root in Armenia, so that the spirit of the Constitution is actually implemented there, and as such, that the actual division of powers that we see now between the 2 branches is really implemented. What are those divisions? And then I'll try to conclude rapidly, because we would like to have the major portion of today's discussion during the question period, not necessarily during the lectures. The judicial authority is being totally separated from the executive branch, which is a blessing. And that is a blessing which we have fought for now over 25 years, because it was a strange concept for people who have been brought up in a Soviet mentality. Because the whole state was subservient to the party. That concept, որ պետությունը ենթակա է հուսակցության, տարօրինակ հասկացողություն է, որ իրան սովետական ժամանակներում համայնավար ռեժիմը մտցուցած էր ամբողջ բնակչության օգային։ In the Soviet constitution, the state was second level and the party was first. That's why, if you remember, when the presidents of the United States used to deal initially with the number 1 of the Soviet Union, they dealt with the Secretary General of the party, not the president. Migoyan was the president, but he wasn't number 1. Therefore, it was very important to understand that that mentality had actually seeped through our population as well, Armenia being one of the 15 republics in the Soviet Union, where they had confused the 2. In our case, the state is paramount. վերջությունը ամենապարզարժեքն է. The state, parties can exist, should exist, and they should have different ideas, different approaches to solving problems, but they are all subservient to the state. And as such, the model that Armenia tried to adopt to separate the three powers, one was an independent judiciary. Gone are the powers that the president or the prime minister appoints judges. Gone. Therefore, it is not true to insist, as some people have done in Armenia, oh, they will find a way to actually do that. They can't if the opposition does its role, because all of those judges will be done by a judicial council composed of independent judges and also by parliament, in which the opposition is active. And unlike other parliamentary democracies that I know quite well, for example Canada, which is where I live, when a majority parliament exists, like today, Trudeau and his Liberal government, all the chairs of the standing committees of parliament, all the chairmen or the chairwomen of the committees, are from the majority party. The Armenian constitution obliges the parliament, the new parliament that will be formed, that there should be a percentage of the chairmanship of those committees reserved for the opposition. So for the YELK and other opposition groups, they have to be chairman, which is really not present in many other parliamentary democracies that I know of. And why is that important? Because the real work of parliament is done in those committees. The votes, yes, are done in the plenary sessions, but the real work, the legislation, the details are done in those committees. So out of so many committees that the parliament establishes, there is a percentage that has to be run by the opposition. The executive branch is composed of the prime minister. It is true that the prime minister is elected by roll call, but let's not confuse two things. In Canada, the prime minister is not elected at all. In the United Kingdom, the prime minister is not elected at all. The majority leader, the party leaders are elected. The party leaders, by their own party rules, are elected as chairman or as president of the parties. They automatically become the prime minister without any vote in parliament when they attain a majority of seats in parliament. Armenia forces a vote. That is the difference. Armenia says that even if you have a majority, and the majority has a leader, that leader has to be put to a vote, by roll call, yes. And then, which is also lacking in other parliamentary democracies, the whole government program has to be put into a vote. And that is an article in the new constitution, which means that the prime minister has so much, I don't know how many days, I can check it if you want, they have so many days only to prepare a program which is going to be brought to parliament in order to attain the parliamentary approval. And the parliament, of course, can deny its approval, in which case the government falls. And when the government falls, there are two ways of actually trying to solve that complex issue. One is that the president, and most people think that the president is only symbolic, it's not. The president has certain powers, very restricted powers, but nevertheless he is a player, he's a key player, who is normally above politics. Unlike the president today, the new president, Ahmet Sarkisyan, who has been elected, is supposed to work as a symbol of the state, who also has certain powers during emergencies, if a government falls. He is the one, for example, that can assign another person to form a government based on the other powers in parliament. And if that fails, of course, the whole parliament is dissolved and there will be new elections. But other than that, symbolically, he is the one who appoints people, who gives the awards, but always on the advice of either parliament or government. That is true. He does not initiate those things alone anymore. That power of the presidency is gone. So it is more like the presidency of Germany, presidency of Israel, and not necessarily like the Queen of England. Most people try to confuse that. Because in parliamentary systems, the office of the president, although symbolic, does have certain authority, and it's usually defined by constitution. In our case, the president can refuse a law, but not permanently, which means that he has the right to actually say that there are errors in this law, which, for example, many other presidents cannot do in other systems, and he can resend it to parliament or government, asking for corrections. Of course, if parliament votes again, or they insist on it to be in the same format as before, it has to pass. But he has that as we call it, the sober second thought. He has the power of sober second thought, which forces an organ of the government, either the parliament or the government, to see his objections or her objections and make sure that certain aspects are covered. Another important aspect of the president is the fact that he, as a symbol of the nation, was tried. There were examples of election that didn't pass, unfortunately. And we'll come to pitfalls, and I'll close my talks with that. One of the things we were asking for as a participant in government was that the president be elected by universal suffrage throughout Armenians as a national symbol. In principle, it was accepted. In reality, they didn't. So we are definitely going to push forward that if there is a presidency in the future, and there are certain other constitutional changes that will come, and I agree with Dr. Barujan, this is not the final version, there will be other versions. We think that the president should be a symbol of the nation, not just a symbol of Armenia. That's a major thing, but we'll come to that. The second aspect, which we have been pushing for, and silently especially, we're working behind the scenes because we don't want to create a panic, is that we think the diaspora should be represented in the Parliament of Armenia. This is not a very strange idea. This is one of the pitfalls of the Constitution. France and Italy actually organize elections in their diaspora. Countries, Romania as well, countries which do not have necessarily a strong diaspora. I mean, most of the French that I know, after a certain time, they don't consider themselves French, like the people in Montreal, Quebec, they don't consider themselves French. They consider themselves Quebecois, Canadian, and so on. But even those, the French state is taking special attention, precautions, to make sure that they stay attached to the motherland. Imagine if that is the case for the French and the Italians, who have a large diaspora, but they assimilate much faster than we do. Why shouldn't Armenia? Why shouldn't there be reserved seats, maybe with somewhat restricted powers, but nevertheless, it's conceptually a powerful symbol that we should have representation in parliament, whether it's two-chamber parliament, one-chamber parliament, and so on. These are things we have presented 3 or 4 different varieties, and we should get that. The other aspect, new constitutions require precedents. We are setting those precedents. Therefore, it is very important to be sure that the new president, that the new government does this job correctly. Because independent of the letter of the Constitution, those precedents have the power of law. We have to be very careful about how they act in the next year and a half. Therefore, 2018 is a crucial year for the enshrinement of our Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a while that I've been in the presence of beautiful minds such as the ones we are enjoying today. It really provides us with education, with mental nourishment. And let me just stress what I hear over and over. It is the promotion of democratic institutions in Armenia, rule of law, human rights. And all these come with informed community members who participate in the government. So it's not the presidential system that's better than the parliamentary. The involved citizens are what we should promote. The next person is the editor of Zarton, Sebag Agopian, and he has come from Lebanon. We really appreciate his presence. Vats Gadar, Sebag. Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Barujan has to leave. He has to take the flight. And on behalf of all of us, let's thank him once again.
I think because we are here 3 representatives of the main Weltanschauung, the main approaches, Tashnaksutun, Ramgavar, այսպես ասելով անկախ, չնայած որ ես հոս շատ հարմար տիպ ունի, որովհետև Տաշտակցական գրթություն ունիմ եւ ազատական գուսակցության անդամ եմ։
Լավ խանութ է։
Այո։ Ես կհուսամ, որ մենք մեր Ցեվում մեր սահմանադրությունը կազմենք Սփյուռքի մեջ, ունենանք մենք ալ մեր համաշխարհային մարմինները եւ այս արիտով մենք այդ միավորում անենք, որը մեր բաբերը երազեցին։
We wish Dr. Barujan safe trip back home. Hopefully he'll come again soon. Sevag Hagopian, the editor of Zartog.
Yes, I'll change the process to see the higher of justice. Yes, շնորհակալություն տայտնեմ գազմագերողողոմերուն և ասիա ինձ համար թեվադիվ է և թե ուրախություն է, որովհետև աս երևույթը պետք է միշտ այսպես մնա և այսպես շարունակվի։ Ես կհավատամ, որ մեր ատենի անհասկացողությունները, խնդիրները և այլն ես չեմ գնա հավատալ, որ արեստազին չէին կամ արեստական չէին, դժբախտաբար մենք տելևիզիոն էինք այդ օրերու ընդհանուր քաղաքական, միջազգային քաղաքական մթնոլորտին պատերազմին և այլն, որ դժբախտաբար շատ ցավալի բաներ վատայեցան։ Սակայն ես ասել եմ շատ առողջ կտեսնեմ ոստեղը, մենք նույնը գնենք Լիբանանի մեջ, թերթերով մենք շատ մոտ ենք և համացայն ենք և այդպես ավելի շարունակենք։ Անցիմ ակտերենի այս իմ մասս արդեն բարոն Վարդանն շեշտեց սկիզբը այս միասնականության ոգին վրա, ինչ որ բարձրացնեմ, որ շատ առողջ է։ I agree with my colleague Mr. Bartan, Mr. Barujan Boskania, but I see it a bit dark. I see it a bit dark. The way he put it, it's a bit dark, and I don't see it as dark as he's seeing it. At the same time, I would take some points from my other colleague, Mr. Rago. He saw some good parts in the Constitution, and I do believe that people, like the presidents or constitutions, people might go, constitutions might change, but the nation and the homeland will stay. So let's look forward for that. Okay, these things might have their disadvantages, bad points, good points, etc. But these things can be changed, and we can look forward for a better constitution for other times. Okay, I removed so many papers here. So just because there was no, just like my colleague said, there was no previous coordination regarding what we're speaking about. So there were some repetitions. I removed them from now. So I will not go deep neither in history nor definition of what democracy is and what is constitution. Me coming from the Middle East, I'm not here to teach you the Americans democracy, neither to pretend that I know about it and practice it more than you guys have lived it. Let me put just a little introductory definitions and go forward. Democracy. I will just remind you that a democracy is a political system or a system. By the way, I have to do it in a written form because I still think in Armenian. So I don't think in English. So that's why I prefer to do it just like this. Thank you. So that the democracy is a political system or a system of decision making within an institution or organization or a country, of course, in which all members have an equal share of power. Constitution. Modern representative democracies attempt to bridge the gulf between the state of nature and the grip of authoritarianism through social contracts, which we call it today, constitution. This contract is called, as I said, constitution in short. Therefore, a constitution is a set of fundamental principles or established precedents according to which a state or other organization is governed. These rules together make up, constitute, in other words, they constitute what the entity is. When these principles are written down into a single document or set of legal documents, those documents may be said to embody a written constitution. So, based on this, and just like Mr. Agop put it, this thing we're discussing about, it's not an Armenian phenomenon. We're not the only nation that we have a constitution or change the constitution or will change the constitution. Because the constitution is there. I will remove some papers. Constitutional democracy. In a constitutional democracy, although the majority rules, the fundamental rights of individuals in the minority are protected. This is the importance of the Constitution. Though the majority will rule, but the basic rights of the other minorities are perfectly protected. This is in general. In constitutional democracies, there is a limitation drawn for the government. In other words, the powers of government are limited by law and the written or unwritten constitution which those in power will obey. System of governments. This is an issue we're discussing about it so much because the bold part of the constitution, though so many points are changed from the past one till the new one, but the system of governance was very the shift from a system between the system of governance was very bold. According to the constitution, different systems of governance could appear: the presidential system and the parliamentary system. To make things easy to comprehend, I will try to summarize their differences as follows. The major difference between these two systems, is that in a presidential system, the executive leader, the president, is directly voted upon the people or via a body elected specifically for the purpose of electing the president and no other purpose. And the executive leader of the parliamentary system, the president and the prime minister, are elected from the legislative branch directly. In the presidential system, it is more difficult to enact legislation, especially in the event that the president has different beliefs than the legislative body. The president only responds to the people. The legislative branch cannot really do anything to threaten the president. This is in the presidential system. As a result, he can make it more difficult for the legislative body to do anything. In the parliamentary system, if the parliament doesn't like the prime minister, they can cast, just like Mr. Agel put it, a vote of no confidence and replace him. Though my colleague, Dr. Varjan, put it from the side of the voting system that it shall be open, but I can see the full part of the COP as well. To reach to an open voting, this means they have reached to some kind of consensus. So when they reach to a kind of consensus, so voting in an open way, it's not a major, let's say, fault. Bottom line is if you believe that government should have more checks and balances, so this is a personal choice, of course. If you believe that the government should have more checks and balances, then a presidential system will give you that. If you believe that it should have the power to enact laws quickly, then you should go for the parliamentary system. So it's either or, and it depends on our preferences. Now, what happened in Armenia with what concerns the referendum that brought forward this constitution, this change in the constitution? A constitutional referendum was held in Armenia on 6 December 2015. The proposed amendments to the constitution changed the country from having a semi-presidential, as I said, system being a parliamentary republic. With the changes that took place during the 2017-18 electoral cycle, the referendum passed with 66.2% of voters supporting it. Voter turnout was 50.8%, passing the 33% needed to validate the results. So it needed 2/3 of yes to change the constitution, and that 2/3 was achieved with the 66.2. Opponents of the new constitution who argued that the amendment was President Serge Sarkisyan's way to stay in power after the end of his second and last term in office, claimed that violence, coercion, and electoral fraud were used to secure the vote. Sorry. Some changes occurred in this sense in the National Assembly. In the previous constitution, National Assembly controlled the executive branch and was responsible for the supervising the budget. Under the amendments, Armenian National Assembly today is consisting of 105 deputies instead of 131 used to be. Moreover, according to the electoral law, 4 seats for ethnic minorities were allocated. this might pave the way to the diaspora
Seats as well.
seats as well. So in today's parliament, Russians, Yazidis, Assyrians, and Kurds have their allocated seats in the new assembly.
1 seat each. Yeah.
1 seat for each. Additionally, proportional electoral system is going to be used in the election of National Assembly. Furthermore, under the amendments, the National Assembly will adopt a law of an amnesty, etc. So, do parliamentary changes in Armenia mean the country is in a shifting course? As I already mentioned above, after the majority of Armenian voters supported the constitutional amendments on December 6, 2015, the current president, Serge Sarkisyan, received a legal opportunity to remain in power while leaving his post. On December 6, a constitutional referendum took place, as I said, in Armenia. The voters were invited to have their say on several important amendments to the nation's constitution. This is not the first time that, as I also said, the Republic of Armenia has instituted a constitutional change. In fact, this constitutional referendum is the third one in the history of our republic, as Mr. Hagop said before me. For some time after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the newly independent Armenia lived by the constitution that had been adopted far back as 1978. In 1995, there was the first post-Soviet constitution. 2005, it was the second constitution, and now it's the third constitution. The constitutional amendment transferred Armenia into a parliamentary republic. The new president will no longer be elected by the popular vote, as Mr. Hago put it, but rather by the votes of the members of the parliament. The real power in its fullness will be concentrated in the supreme legislative body and the government. In short, the party that wins parliamentary elections will play a more important role. Previously, these elections had been no more than a prelude for the presidential campaign and a kind of test for the country's administrative system. In the future political system, the winner of these elections will be the force that takes control of the representative branch, forms the government, and determines a candidate for the post of prime minister. Under that scenario, parliamentary elections will be the key political event in the country. From a formal and legal point of view, one could speak of Armenia's progress toward a more democratic rule. So having a modern constitution means going further in democracy. But from a formal legal point of view, as I said, it is seen as a progress. But let's see what happened. However, politics, especially in post-Soviet republics, has its own, let's say, own way of thinking, as again Mr. Hago put it. This kind of thing was the same. The very same scenario was tried in Georgia, and it didn't end up just like the president in Georgia, just like the desire, just like what the president back then desired. In a second, when the new parliament was elected, he suddenly noticed that it's not his party who got the let's say, the majority, and his dream of continuing being on the post of the power was not realized. So, as I said, constitutions might change. Also, people might also change in some time. So what are the chances, though, that the Armenians will not repeat the errors made by their Georgian neighbors, or might benefit from the same example that happened in Georgia? The preliminary results of the vote allow various interpretations. Let's go back to the numbers which I mentioned, and certainly both the party in power and the opposition will make use of that. As a matter of fact, the opposition is already claiming abuse of administrative resources and large-scale violations in the counting of votes. We heard about that, right? Just over one half, 50.5% of all voters took part in the referendum. Among those, 63.3% of those voted in support of the constitutional amendments. Thus, formally, the amendments have been approved. However, if the proportion of supporters of the new constitution is computed with the respect to the total number of voters, the figure is 32.17%. Although this is no violation from the formal point of view, this result can hardly be called an overwhelming victory for the system. After the referendum, Armenia went through an electoral pause. The new electoral cycle started in 2017 with the parliamentary elections. The authorities prepared themselves for the campaign in good time. This was facilitated to some extent by the disunity of the opposition and its lack of charismatic leaders capable of rallying all those discontented. The manifestations of social protest we all saw it on TV, that took place 2 years ago, confirmed the deficiencies that had been characteristic of the opposition previously. On the other hand, the support of the constitutional amendments at the referendum can't make the presidential team drunk with success, in quotes. The socioeconomic situation in the Republic is complicated, and the public discontent with the powers is strong. True, there is the problem of converting this discontent into an articulated political program. However, this does not mean the presidential team has carte blanche to do as it pleases. The opposition always has to put its ranks in order. In the meantime, but the constitution has changed. This is a reality. A new president is elected for 7 years based on the new constitution. This is also a fact. It happened one or 2 weeks ago. This is also a fact that we shall all accept and start thinking as nation state who has a nation-state mindset.
Yes, and he has to resign the party, I forgot to mention.
Yes.
And he has to resign from his party.
Yes.
The president. From the party, whichever party.
He should be a neutral citizen, independent citizen. A given constitution reflects a given country's political culture. I do believe we shall never question whether presidential or parliamentary is more democratic. We shall always consider the people's political culture, the mindset of leading the people, and the regime which best serves them. Otherwise, even the most democratic constitution could transfer to serve a tyranny. Never forget that Syria has a constitution. Saddam's Iraq and Gaddafi's Libya used to have constitutions too. It is always important to have a separation of powers, rule of law, transparency, accountability, and independent judiciary. All are well considered in the Armenian constitution, thankfully. Today, contrary with the countries I mentioned above, and this is what's important now, what is essential today is to have a civilized and respectful approach towards the other. Do we have that? Some people tell that there is no freedom of speech in Armenia. I see it exactly the opposite. There is an excess and abuse in that so-called freedom. Look at the media, which is controlled by the opposition or the opposition's media in Armenia. Add on it the social media, which had crossed all borders. Back then, before 20 years, there was that, I put it in the Turkish way, or the Armenian, Lebanese way. There were some committees of women committees, they call it shirkat, yes. And some man, which they don't have, that they have no customers at the shop, they used to play backgammon on the and they talk politics, etc. All that is now on the Facebook. And it's being spread like that, and it is being multiplied. And to those who are hearing this gossip have larger numbers. You may find their big time hatred in the social media, unlimited gossip, big and unexplainable grudge and mockery towards each other, whether it is an individual or a fellow citizen or a political figure, and this is unacceptable. We shall be civilized enough to take our claims to a political platform and not street and gossip salons. We as a nation, if we don't have the civilized political culture and mindset, the blessings that a good constitution brings to a nation will never unite it and serve them in a good manner, but to the contrary. Let us face it, we the Armenians are a bit away from what democracy is. One of the pillars of democracy is to have our local Armenian committees, what concerns associations and organizations or bodies, be consist of elected members. Look around, please, to our diaspora, from Beirut to Africa, from Alaska to Argentina, and tell me, man, how many do we have the culture to come up with leadership and representatives purely made of election results? I don't see it like that way. I will go further. Democracy starts from home. Do we have democracy at home, where based on our primitive or Ottoman culture, the dominant figure is still the man? Before asking from Armenia or other things which we are not yet achieved, before asking from Armenia or others things which we are not achieved yet in our local communities and even families, we are in constant fights within our own enclave due to our sick egos. Why you're blaming Serge Sarkisian when you exactly act the same in your party or home? Let us be rational and less Hippocratic, please. I have seen lots of Armenian people from the Middle East, including those Syrian Armenian refugees, sitting in Mereti coffee shop next to the Opera House in Yerevan, criticizing and nagging about the system in Armenia and praising their Syrian president. It's a hypocrisy. Look who's talking. Sometimes I never controlled myself not to tell them, look who's talking. Look at your president first, and then let's talk about you. This is not a moral preaching. Of course, I'm doing it here. It is pinpointing the sad truth, just to highlight on where we personally are in this matter. If the Armenian mindset is in its caveman state and not ready to accept or never accepts the fellow Armenian and work in positive and peaceful manner with him, then we are in real trouble, even if a heaven is granted to us to live in. From this point, and to put an end to this presentation, I do advise to take the teaching of the new constitution to the youth in Armenia in the form of civil education, by integrating the subject in the educational curriculum to help our future generations be nurtured in much healthy and civilized political culture. Only then we as a nation shall survive in this new world. Thank you.
There is a very well-known quote that says, "Be the change that you would like to see in the world." The change has to start within us. I'd like to thank Dr. Varujan Voskanin, who left us, Hagop Del Khachadurian, who has come from Montreal, thank you very much, and Seva Gogopian, thank you very, very much.
Pleasure.
We are going to open the question answer session. If anybody has any question, this could be an opportunity for people to give lectures, but try to make it a question, and it's from that mic in the middle of the room that you can address your question to the panelists. Ara is moving. If anybody else is going to have a question, please go behind Ara, and let's make it a bit more efficient and not waste time. And I repeat, clear, and give us your question and indicate who you want to ask the question to.
Thank you both. Freedom House in its Nations in Transit report identifies Armenia as a semi-consolidated authoritarian regime. So, how do you think the authoritarianism practiced by the authorities will impact the implementation of the parliamentary virtues that you described? Thank you.
Well, there's no question that I agree with the fact that the situation in Armenia is far from being ideal. I think all three speakers did mention that to certain degrees, but also we have to keep in mind that it's always easy to criticize instead of build. The difficult part is always the building part. Don't forget that the system in Armenia has lived through really 70 years of Soviet mentality, which is so difficult to extract, and we're having all kinds of problems. But we shouldn't forget the main and important points. We have dreamed of an independent Armenia, we have dreamed of a free Armenia. This is not the ideal Armenia that we had dreamed about, but nevertheless it's a step in the right direction. So we should all work to make it improve gradually, as much as possible through the effort of a united Armenian front throughout the world, because we should really convert the strength of the diaspora in nation building, in state building, something which hasn't happened fully yet. And that comes from a realization by both segments of our population that we are truly in this together, and we have to make sure that Armenia not only survives, but thrives despite the difficulties we face. Now, there is the phenomenon of people. It is true, and I do not hide it, that the fact that when you have consolidated leadership and when people linger past systems, it does not project a good image. And there are, of course, concerns in Armenia that the current leadership will somehow survive and continue. We all hope that this will be a beginning. It's not an end. So just establishing a constitutional system, a new system, a parliamentary system, does not solve the problems. It is only a way. The thing that we have to be careful about, and we should all survey, is that we ask of the Armenian authorities, whatever shape, color, or party they're from, to be very honest and to be respectful of not only the letter but the spirit of the Constitution. For example, if the meddling in the justice system continues, then I should be, as a leader in the community, as one of the many leaders in the community, should be the one to openly speak up saying that, you know, this was our last hope. When you have a question of justice, justice should be neutral, the law should be blind, as the statutes all denote, and it should be balanced. And as such, for example, this is a crucial area of Armenian government that should be not only by letter supposed to dispense justice, but that the population actually see that it is dispensing justice. Secondly, the mechanism that tries to balance the power between the legislative and the executive has to work. Which means, for example, that certain committees of the parliament have to actually bring ministers to report to those committees, and if there are really factual data or information available where you can put the minister on the spot and make sure that his life is not as easy as it is usually, then so much the better. Now that power now resides in the various standing committees of parliament. The opportunity is for us to use it properly, to actually use it. And because of some of the committees being chaired by the opposition, naturally the opposition would like to put the government on the spot, which is very natural. I mean, in Armenia, and that is the part that bothers me the most, you're either against or for something. There's no such thing in the political world. You can be for or against, depending on the situation, depending on the issue. That's why we think one of the major things that Armenia has to have is a constructive opposition, which is not automatically thrown aside by the authorities because but that they have sometimes to listen. They should have also the initiative to legislate, which they do, by the way, with the new constitution. So how are they going to use it? Because they can now suggest legislation. And of course, if you don't have a majority and you can't convince the majority, it doesn't pass. But that's the rules of law in any country that I've been in. And I've lived in many countries. I mean, the will of the majority does, unfortunately, gain precedence, but by protecting the rights of the minorities as well. So my hope is the young generation. My hope is that all that generation, without naming names, who have actually been trained and aspired, and some of them have actually attained leadership through the training during the Soviet times, would pass away, and the new generation, and most of them are actually educated in the values that we are familiar with, would dominate the stage, the political stage in Armenia.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question, please. If you have questions, please go stand in line. We have 2 extra people there.
What was the impetus and how was this initiated, this government change?
The constitution change?
Yes.
Is it for me or for?
Doesn't matter whoever wants to.
I'll add something. Let's say I'll address it first, and then I'll add some points.
I guess I know where our friend is going. There is this conspiracy theory. It could be right, it could be wrong, but we are a nation, we believe in a hidden hand, etc. So some say that the initiative came from the point that Serge Sarkisian wanted to continue in being in power. This could be right. But as I said, same did the Georgian president, and it didn't work. So if your question is coming from that point,
No, it wasn't.
okay,
it's just like.
Yeah, I see.
Is it like driven by the population, or is driven by?
After all, there was a referendum, okay, and the population chose yes with high percentage, less percentage, according to the law. That percentage made the constitution, the amendment, the change of the amendments, made it pass.
What I can add is that, and I think it's a very important question, is that as far as we are concerned as Taşrakçı, from day one we were saying that it's wrong. The presidential system is wrong. So the impetus for us was clear, because we have been consistently promulgating the same message. Whether we were able to convince the population or not, that's another story. But we finally got there. And despite the fact that we're small percentage-wise in Armenia, we have to agree that throughout the last years, I mean, the political parties of the diaspora gave so much to Armenia that we don't realize now. After all, I mean, look at the values that were returned to Armenia, the tricolor, the Ziyanashan, the national ideology, the Panagi Gazmavorum. These are all things that we should be proud of. And these are things that we collectively had a hand in building in Armenia. They didn't just do it by themselves through their Soviet experience. That's not what happened. So first, there was persistence in certain political powers. I can say that when we started talking about this, all of them were against it. All of them. The Republican Party, Zaugyan's party, Rafi Ovanesyan was against it, because everybody was seeing himself as the president, as the central figure of authority. We tried to tell them, just as Sedat mentioned, look at what's happening in Georgia. Georgia is a very good example of a terribly bad presidential system gone wrong, in which a Georgian president of Armenian origin, unfortunately, Saakashvili, was a disaster for the country. He declared war very unwisely against its large neighbor. The country got segmented. Up to now, they cannot control the whole country. There are all kinds of internal conflicts. So many of the ills that happened during the time was because of the central strongman tactics that Saakashvili used in Georgia. And the Georgians decided that the best way to get rid of this situation is to get rid of not the person, but the system. And that's what should have happened here also. Because we are tired of all strongmen also. Whether it's Delgedosyan, whether it's Kocharian, whether it's Sarkisian, these are all images of strong men that are more like military leaders than political leaders, as far as I'm concerned. So the issue is, how do you make the system work? And that is a totally different topic. And that's why I was saying, it's good to have the system, which we now have. In a month, there are no excuses. This system has to come into action. It has to be implemented. The judiciary has been elected, by the way. They had vote for each judge, one by one. They openly came, they presented their candidacy. So this was open.
How many of them we got? The judges?
Well, the Constitutional Court, it's a complex system. There's the Constitutional Court, there's the Cassation Court. So unlike the US system, there's no one Supreme Court. There are two Supreme Courts. One deals with the Constitution, the other deals with the other issues. Then you have appellate courts, then you have then you have the appeals courts, and then you have the local courts. And because it's not a federal system, there's no state court or federal court, it's all one system. But the Constitutional Court and the Cassation Court are voted by Parliament. And the nomination comes either from the government, a part of it, or the other nomination comes from a judicial council, which are composed of judges. Judges nominate people which the Parliament votes on, because they have to evaluate the credentials of the candidate as a lawyer, as a judge, and they have to have 10, 15 years of experience and so on. So it's improving. Now, are these necessarily the best people that we elected? Probably not. I don't know half of them. But some of them are really world-renowned constitutional authorities, Gary Tartunian being one. I mean, he has been involved in all kinds of administrations from day one, from the revolutionary times up to now. But nobody denies the fact that he's an excellent lawyer and an extremely well-versed constitutional expert. That is his title. He might not be good in other things, but he's good in those aspects. So we have to be vigilant. We have to be vigilant from outside the diaspora, and we have to be vigilant from inside as part of the government or the opposition to make sure that the spirit follows the letter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is the following. Every time we go to Yerevan, we see that the young people really almost run the city. When it comes to this subject, what do we know about the younger generation thinking about this or actually having an idea of where to go from here?
From a constitutional perspective or in general?
Yeah, in general.
In general, it's a very difficult question to answer, but I'm sure Seva also would think about an answer. But what does the young generation want? Not being a young one anymore, I'm not probably the best spokesperson for that generation, although we always think that with the young ones because we started very young. But I can tell you one thing. I mean, I have relations with these young people in Armenia because we deal with them on a professional level. I try to encourage, because being in IT, for example, that's one of the sectors favored in Armenia, and we try to encourage them. And I can tell you that there are certain sectors which are tremendously advancing in Armenia. I mean, it's easy for the media to report on fake news, bad news. These are words that are very much used in the States nowadays. And there are lots of those in Armenia too, because sensationalism sells. Sensation is more interesting. Destroying something is much easier to do. Gossip is so much more interesting than simple, stupid facts and numbers. But the actual reality is, today in Armenia, I mean, there are a couple of sectors of the economy that have taken flight. I couldn't say that was the case about 3-4 years ago, but now it is. IT is being one. The average salary of an IT professional in Armenia, to my great surprise, because I tried to hire some of them to work for my projects in Canada, from Armenia. I don't want to move them. I want them to do it there and then just transfer in the code. The average was $3,000 US. That's a hefty salary for somebody in Armenia. I mean, you might say that, well, what's $3,000? These are, by the way, these are net. These are not gross amounts.
That's mentioned the minimum wage there.
The minimum wage is ridiculous. No, monthly, 3,000 for IT. For IT professionals. So, and some of them I couldn't justify. Myself, sitting in Montreal, I couldn't hire them because the 3,000 is the net. So if you add the taxes and so on, you're talking about $5,000. But in Armenia, they don't have the concept. They don't say, I earn 5,000. They say, I earn 3,000 because they calculate the money that goes into their pocket. So unlike us, they don't take the taxes afterwards. It's already taken. And as such, it's becoming expensive, but that's very important because that keeps them there. It shows them that they can compete on the international market. That is why so many of the international organizations have suddenly rushed into Armenia. They're not there because they want to do some charitable work. They're there because they are businesses. I mean, Microsoft has office, Google has office, Tumo has now 9 centers. We're working with them to open one in Jabal. Another one is being opened up in Beirut. A Paris office is being opened. I mean, this is something which is being exported from Armenia. So there are lots of success stories in a couple of domains like IT, like finance. Finance is very strong in Armenia. The banking structure is nothing like what it was 20 years ago. And the salaries are very acceptable. And the third, of course, is education. The traditional industries are the worst, unfortunately. So that means that the majority of the population that during Soviet times had a large market, they had all kinds of factories that were churning out goods and services, goods that nobody wanted, but they were doing it. That industry is gone. So you have a population of 35 years old and above, 40 years old and above, who will never be satisfied. Unless they change their domain, which is not always easy, they do a full retraining because they will never go back to the glory days. Now, we have 3 important developments last year. Well, one is the fact that the market, the Eurasian market that created so much grief for us. I was involved in the initial negotiations that the Armenian government was doing with Europe. Remember when Said Sargsyan went to Moscow and suddenly signed the Eurasian agreement, and Europe was all angry? I was in the middle of it, and everybody was cursing us, saying, what happened here? Armenia turned towards the Russians and so on, and you were not negotiating in good faith and so on. We said, look, have patience, and Armenia will sign the European agreement, but have patience and also help us out. Well, they did. They signed it in November. They signed it in November. So now they have access to those two markets. They have access to the internal market, and they have access to the European market. Next round is the States. And the Armenian government is trying its best to make sure that its relationship with the United States achieves a higher degree of integration. And of course, our lobby, ANCA and others, are doing their best to make sure that we actually encourage the US government in that regard.
Next question, please.
Hi, I'm a political scientist. I teach politics at NYU, and I did not follow the Armenian constitutional process too close, not enough to be able to talk about the architecture of the constitution, because architecture is something that also is reflective of the political culture. But I follow, because I'm from Turkey, I followed the draft constitutional process in Turkey, which was a joint process by AKP and BDP mostly, the former Kurdish party, not the current one, to which the CHP and MHP, the nationalist center and the nationalist right, were against. And then for the first time AKP did in that constitution was, because of the looming war, the civil war of the last 30 years and whatnot, they decided to come up with a fundamentally different constitution in terms of its architecture. Since the Ottoman times, the Turkish constitutions always started with the state, and then they always described, the boundaries of the state, what the state does and does not do, and what the citizens have to do vis-a-vis the state. So for the first time in 2012, starting 2012, they started talking about something like the South African Constitution and the German Constitution, which architecture-wise, it starts with the humans, with dignity, precisely with human dignity, and it's a very complicated sort of process and term that they spent hours discussing, and I myself wrote a report on that, on the first sort of article, first of the draft constitution, which was not excellent or whatever, but it was good enough. So my question is as follows. About the architecture of the Armenian constitution. To what extent the Armenian constitution, I understand the Armenian nation's history is not one of an oppressor or a civil war within Armenia proper, Eastern Armenia proper, etc. But to what extent the Armenian constitution is in tune with human dignity in its architecture, and to what extent, what is the relational sort of hierarchy in terms of, what does it start with? What is at the top of the architecture of the constitution, of the new constitution? And if you can also talk about how it was before, and whether there is a change in terms of architectural ranking. Thank you.
Yes, very interesting question. There's a major change between what existed in the second constitution and this third one. It wasn't just tinkering between presidential and parliamentary. There were fundamental architectural onsets that changed place. For example, the constitution itself, previously it started with the state organs because of the mentality of what they had inherited from the past. Currently, this constitution starts with the dignity of the individual and basic human rights. That's the paramount, and that is the portion that Dr. Valjan was trying to convey, is that all the other articles were pushed backward, and the two that were brought forward, which are after the fundamentals of the constitutional order, by the way, this is also available on the internet, the two headings are basic rights and freedoms of the human being and the citizen. That's where it starts. So the individual is at the center of the constitutional domain, and the legislative guarantees and main objectives of state policy in social, economic, and cultural spheres. In many of the constitutions, you don't even have that. They don't talk about social spheres, cultural spheres as a distinct constitutional prerogative. So from that aspect, they try to emulate the European model, more like the German, as you said, than others, and say that the preoccupation should be the individual at the center, basic rights, principles at the center, surrounded by two other major concepts. One, collective decision-making as reflected by the parliamentary system where the National Assembly is supreme, and also followed by the protection of minorities, which would rein in some of the tendencies of majorities to abuse power. So that is the basic concept of how this constitution was achieved.
I can provide you with the introductory part of the what we're.
It's on the parliament. Can we move to? Are you done?
No, I'm done. I can ask later. You know.
Okay. If we can move, and maybe if we can have the direct questions, and maybe we can cut the answers also shorter.
Okay.
In this new constitution, is there any provision that protects the diaspora Armenians who are considering to make investments in Armenia?
No, it is not a constitutional matter. That is a law matter. It should be protected by law, not constitution. But the constitution refers to the diaspora, yes. The constitution refers, and this is really well put, about, and in English it is really badly translated. When you look at the English, it's very ugly because it says nation, nation something, and motherland something. What they mean, because the Armenian words are better. Hayrenagam, which means that respecting to the Armenia. You have Azkain, which means the whole Ask, the whole nation as a whole. So there are those two concepts in there, and they do emphasize certain stuff. And also they have addressed issues even like the Armenian church. In most constitutions of the world, the church and the state are totally separated and they don't have articles. But they have put one specifically regarding the Armenian Apostolic Church in general, guaranteeing freedom for the others and so on. And one of the criticisms that was leveled here, and I agree with it 100%, is it's too detailed. This is small print, 40 pages long. It's not an inspiring document. Okay? It's not like some of the constitutions you see in the world where you open it up, it's 10 pages crisp, and it says all the rest are details and have to be addressed in law.
So where the initiation has to come from the opposition or from diaspora political parties to make sure that diaspora Armenians who don't have any very collective protection for their investment.
I think it should be guaranteed by law. I agree with you that it's definitely something which they are working on. You know that they have created, this is totally off topic because it has nothing to do with constitution, but just to satisfy your curiosity, they have created something called the DFA. DFA is an agency run by Spirkahai in Armenia, who is trying to protect those investments. It's called Development Fund of Armenia, which has direct access to the government. And if there are any abuses of power or somebody are threatening investors from outside, they intervene in protecting that. So the more powerful that agency becomes, the more justice will prevail regarding business dealings in Armenia.
Well, how many more? We'll like to wrap it up. Nuran, why don't you go? No, Maro, because we really have to wrap it up. It's in 5 minutes.
I have two questions to both gentlemen. The first gentleman that had to leave mentioned that President Sarkisyan should not become the new prime minister. What are your thoughts about it? And my second question is...
We don't vote.
Yeah. No, politically I'm asking, whether it is... Because it reminds me of Putin and Erdogan's situation. And the second question that I have, there's also the question that is going around that the new President Sarkisyan cannot become the president because he wasn't an Armenian citizen for the past 6 years. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, you're asking for my personal opinion. I'll give you my personal opinion. This has nothing to do with the Tashkent Bureau or with Armenian political powers. If I was Sarkisyan, I wouldn't run, because that would be an excellent signal to the country that a change of leadership is concerned. But keep something in mind, and this is very important. This is extremely important. Even if he doesn't run, and he stays as the chairman of the Republican Party that has a majority in parliament, whoever is appointed prime minister, he will have somebody from behind the curtains that controls him. And that is not necessarily a better situation. Does this happen in the world? Yes, many examples like that. Where you have a prime minister who is a figurehead, but the actual power resides somewhere else. I mean, South Africa went through that phase after Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela withdrew and he said that I'm old enough, I don't want to, and then appointed a president. But Nelson Mandela had all the strings in his hands. And this is a very saintly figure who was adored by everybody, including me. But it happens when you have people who have such an influence and they are actually involved. So, unless he resigns from the presidency of the Republican Party, it's not just the post of prime minister which is open. Number one. Number two, what was the second one?
Whether the new President Sarkisian, whether
oh,
he
yes.
is legitimate.
The issue with President Sarkisian is the following. And what I've heard as justification, I'll give it to you. Of course, it's concerning. The issue is that in the Constitution it says that the person has to be 6 years of resident of Armenia, 6 years in Armenia, and also have been 6 years of a citizen of Armenia. Now, I'll describe the issue with Armen Sarkisian, but then I have a comment which is very important. They are claiming that as a Tespan, he, of course, is a citizen of Armenia, and he's a resident of Armenia, because when you send to diplomatic postings, it doesn't mean that your rights are curtailed. His problem was that he has been so many times, he was prime minister, then Tespan, then Speaker High, then Tespan again, then Speaker High, and now Tespan again, that during all those, he's definitely an Armenian resident and an Armenian citizen. But the issue is that to the letter of the Constitution, it's not 6 years since the last time he became a Tespan. So they're saying it's like a residency. If you spend more than 6 months in a year, they give you the whole year. That is the excuse they give. That's not my opinion.
In Lebanon, we have this word, ijtihad. Ijtihad of the Tisbanadun is an Armenian land.
Right, but it's only less than 6 years. That's
yes.
So the other one is that, and this is what the opposition is making bigger fuss, is that when did he resign his British citizenship? Well, he says he's resigned. He hasn't produced the papers, and we're taking his word for it. Others are not. But the thing is, I have a major problem with that provision of the Constitution. That is one of the pitfalls. We didn't have time to go into that. Why would dual citizenship actually not allow somebody to be active in the political sphere in Armenia? This is terribly wrong in the Armenian Constitution, and actually got worse. Because in the new Constitution, they put all the functions. Remember, Armenia has had ministers in the past who were not even citizens.
Yes.
Rafi Ovanesyan being one, as you probably know. When Rafi Ovanesyan was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs, he wasn't even a citizen of Armenia. Secondly, they said, okay, you can be a dual citizen, you become part of the government. There are certain functions which cannot be dual citizens. We swallowed it. For example, a member of parliament cannot be a dual citizen. If you are elected as a member of parliament, you have to resign your other citizenship. That's unfair for all the speakers that are living in Armenia. And I have many colleagues who are Canadians living in Armenia as dual citizens. They have both Armenian citizenship and Canadian citizenship, but they don't want to give back their Canadian citizenship. So that is unjust. Now, unjust or not, that's the law, and he's claiming that he's given it. Now, has he given it like 6 years before, in the last 4 years? I don't know.
Thank you. I'll go
but there are countries who apply single citizenship on their regular citizens as well. This is not an Armenian phenomenon. This is one. Second, I don't know what the general opinion is, but I do believe that the Armenian leadership have learned a lot from their mistakes back then. Okay, throughout these years, I do believe, and I'm experiencing by reading and by following their actions, and you're seeing it as well, that they have learned a lot from their previous mistakes. Forget about the taxi driver who takes you from the
constant complaints.
Yeah, constant complaints, Sergik, Sashik, etc. I have experienced a personal thing. We hired an IT guy there as a webmaster in Armenia. I lost him for 1 week, and we had a major problem in our website. I was searching for him for a week, and suddenly he showed up. And he wrote a letter to me, said, I'm sorry, Sevar, and he was not at work for 1 week. This is a culture which has to be changed. It has nothing to do with the president. As for the president, his actions, I'm not a defendant of the president, of course, and I was critical towards some actions. But as a matter of fact, let's face it, he appointed someone who's coming after him, put aside his authorities, etc. He appointed someone who is really good for the position. We, as diaspora Armenians, think, let's face it, we never assign someone better than us in our position. So there's a credit.
That's very good, the constitution and the parliamentary system you're talking about. And there are opposition parties and majority party in the parliament. The majority party is 65%, I believe, right? Now, how is that the majority party becomes majority party? Could you elaborate on the approach of how they are elected and how they become the majority? Because if they become majority, they are the parliament, they are the tsaris, or whatever they are. So how the people elect those majority or the opposing party?
It's direct, universal vote by the
population. Is there any influence, indirect influence, things like that?
It's direct, universal vote based on a proportional system, and all the parties that compete, they get seats allocated by the percentages that they win, plus, and that is the ugly portion which we're trying to eliminate, they have a rating system, something what Lebanon is trying to do in the next election, where you actually vote for the candidate despite the whole system being proportional. This is very strange to explain to an American or a Canadian because we don't use it in Canada.
It's very much similar to the one man, one vote, but it's too complicated in Lebanon.
For example, you will never have a situation as you had in the States where somebody can win the popular vote but lose the election. There's no such thing. In Armenia, there's no such thing. It's all based on the votes. In Canada, it's the same thing. In Canada, for example, you have a riding or an area where whoever passes as number one gets elected, regardless of the total number of votes. So you can have a government which is formed by 30% of the vote.
But this majority party that has
the Republicans,
it can go and go and go on. I mean, is there a way that they dominate the mind of the people? I mean, probably is part of human rights.
That is psychology now. I
can't. It doesn't have to psychology. Like in the United States, every 2 years there is a change of the Congress.
But the Congress doesn't change that much. I'm sure you know that. I mean, I know of congressmen that have been in there for 20 years.
The party which is majority can go on every 4 years or every 7 years, non-stop, and there is no difference than the Tsarist regimes.
I do believe changes come from within. We're not living in Armenia. Let's see what the people can do. The opposition there lacks leadership, lacks experience. A day might come when the opposition might be in a better situation, but let the change happen from within.
My question is, who will negotiate now for Karabakh? The president or the prime minister? And also, hypothetically, let's say that Armenia decides to give up lands, God forbid, but let's say hypothetically, who will authorize that? Will it be a parliamentary decision, the prime minister, the president?
Interesting. I'll give you two answers. One, what is legally possible, and the second, what we think should happen. As Tashnak Symbol, as any other party, I guess, that we have our own principles. Legally speaking, interestingly enough, this new constitution does not define a commander-in-chief of the armed forces as an individual, which is very good, but defines it as a collective authority. Therefore, the function of the commander-in-chief is the government, not the prime minister, not the president. But in emergency and in war, it becomes the prime minister. Because during that time, you cannot have all kinds of meetings and so on. Something what Churchill went through during the war, where supposedly the cabinet decided, but most of the decisions was taken by Churchill in an extremely democratic country called the United Kingdom. So, that being said, The direct negotiations with the Azeris has to be conducted by the government, and it is the authority of the Prime Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister on the Armenian side to conduct the negotiations. The approval of whatever package eventually comes to the table, and hopefully it won't come anytime soon, that package will be put to a referendum in Armenia and a referendum in Artsakh. And the Artsakh authorities have to pronounce their stance. They have to say what they think about the package that is the final negotiating solution. And in both cases, there will be referendums. Our point, as a Tashkent, of course, is that whatever shape or form it takes, if there is a referendum, and if there's any concessions on the question of lands, we're going to vote against it and make sure that the population understands. But we have to keep in mind that negotiations are done by international law. Negotiations are done by international rules. And every president, regardless of the last three presidents, whether it's Bedrosian, Kocharian, or Sargsyan, have instructed their foreign ministers, who are supposedly the chief negotiators, that they should adopt certain principles and they should navigate in the fluidity of the situation, so that Armenia is on the positive side of the track and it says yes to certain international initiatives, while the refusing party is always Azerbaijan. This game has limits. We have not achieved that yet, thankfully, because of the stupidity of the other side, who has always created such situations that Armenia easily withdraws and says, you see, they're not really willing to negotiate. This is a warmongering regime that wants to start war every minute. Therefore, what are you talking about a global initiative, a package solution or an individual solution? We should discuss with them the ceasefires, how to stop the fighting, so they are actually fudging the agenda to postpone the issue, which is good, but as I said, it has certain limits. So there will be some compromises when the issue comes, but there will be no compromise on the issue of the independence of Karabakh. Azerbaijan is so far from that. They haven't even entertained the idea of independence. The father did, because he was almost at a stage where the father of this current president was almost willing to compromise, but he asked for so many issues in return that it was impossible to do. But at least he had accepted the idea of the loss of Karabakh, which was very good. This one hasn't, because of his money, because of the oil, because of the revenues, because of his total control of the country. It's a pure dictatorship in Azerbaijan. An extreme example, even worse than Saudi Arabia, where you actually, he doesn't have any reason to compromise. And the more he stays like that, the more he postpones the situation. Therefore, yes, when actually they are willing to negotiate seriously, there will be difficult days ahead.
I'd like to once again thank Aberdeen Khachadurian and Sevagagopian who've come from Montreal, Lebanon. Please, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy a coffee and then a chance to talk to our guests. Thank you.
Referendum Aynen gizlemeyeceğim.
Sparo 9.
Իրեն հերացային դարի։ Սուրճ չի մնացած, ես ամեն շատ սուրճ